Catherine Beaumont lived in a world built on glittering chandeliers, marble floors, and carefully polished appearances. Her mansion stood like a castle at the edge of the city, where high iron gates and sprawling gardens marked the difference between her world and the struggles of ordinary people. Guests often described the estate as breathtaking, an ocean of wealth and elegance. Yet those who worked within its walls knew that its beauty masked a household where love and warmth were often overshadowed by pride and control. Catherine herself was the embodiment of sophistication. Her tall frame carried expensive silk gowns that seemed to flow with every step. She wore pearls during breakfast, diamonds at lunch, and gold in the evening, as if jewelry were as essential as air. To the outside world, she was the picture of success. An accomplished woman married to a wealthy businessman, living a life many could only dream of. She held charity galas, posed for society magazines, and made sure her name was whispered with admiration in the city's elite circles. Yet beneath that flawless exterior, Catherine had a flaw. Her pride was as heavy as the jewels she wore. She could not bear the thought of anyone, especially someone beneath her social standing, outshining her or threatening her place in her family. She loved her husband, Daniel, but in her own way, possessively. And though she cared for her daughter, Emily, she often mistook discipline for affection and control for love. Daniel Beaumont, her husband, was nothing like her. Where Catherine was sharp, Daniel was gentle. Where she was proud, he was humble. Born into modest means, Daniel had worked his way up with discipline and honesty. He still carried the heart of a man who remembered hunger, hardship, and struggle. Though wealth now surrounded him, he never let it blind him to the value of kindness. He treated every person with respect, from CEOs to janitors. It was this warmth that had once drawn Catherine to him, though over the years, her obsession with status had created a gulf between their philosophies. Their daughter Emily, only 7 years old, was a reflection of both parents. She had her mother's delicate features and her father's soft, compassionate heart. But while Catherine dressed her in ribbons and pearls, encouraging her to behave like a little lady, Emily longed for something simpler. Stories before bed, hugs after school, and someone who listened when she was afraid. Daniel tried, but his busy schedule often pulled him away. Catherine, caught up in appearances, offered expensive toys instead of presents. And so, Emily's little heart grew quietly lonely. It was into this world that Grace stepped. Grace was a young black woman in her 20s, slender but strong from years of hard work. She had grown up in poverty, her childhood filled with struggles Catherine could never imagine. After her mother passed away, leaving her with nothing but memories and lessons of resilience, Grace sought employment wherever she could find it. She worked tirelessly, never allowing bitterness to take root, even when life seemed merciless. When she was offered a position in the Beaumont household, she accepted with gratitude, determined to give her best despite the cold reputation of her employers. From her first day, Grace distinguished herself not just through her efficiency, but through her gentle spirit. She cleaned without complaint, cooked with care, and always carried herself with quiet dignity. She never raised her voice, never answered back, even when criticized harshly. But what made her truly different was the way she treated people, not as titles or roles but as human beings. Even the youngest gardener felt seen in her presence. It wasn't long before Emily noticed. Children are instinctively drawn to love, and Emily found in Grace the tenderness she craved. Grace listened when she spoke about her dolls, knelt to her level when she scraped her knee, and smiled warmly when Emily proudly showed her a crayon drawing. For Emily, these moments meant everything. Slowly, she began seeking Grace's presence more and more, slipping into the kitchen just to sit with her while she worked, or sneaking into the laundry room to chatter about her day. At first, Catherine tolerated this. She assumed Emily's interest would fade, as children often became fixated on new faces. But the bond only deepened. Emily would wait for Grace to tuck her into bed with a whispered prayer, even when her mother sat just a room away. She laughed more with Grace than she did with anyone else, and sometimes, in her innocent honesty, she blurted things that stung Catherine deeply. "Grace hugs me warmer than you do, Mama." Those words, said with no malice, cut Catherine to her core. She brushed them off with a forced laugh, but inside, jealousy simmered. She began to watch more closely, her sharp eyes narrowing whenever Emily ran into Grace's arms or clung to her hand. The other servants noticed as well. The staff gossiped quietly in corners, as servants often do. "The little girl loves the maid more than her own mother," one cook whispered. "Catherine won't stand for that much longer." The butler shook his head, knowing too well the prideful temper of the lady of the house. Grace, however, remained unaware of these brewing storms. She gave affection without calculation, her heart too sincere to imagine jealousy could bloom from kindness. She saw Emily not as a rich child or as her employer's daughter, but simply as a little girl in need of warmth. She remembered her own childhood, the nights when her mother's embrace was the only shield against hunger and fear. If she could give Emily a piece of that comfort, she considered her work more meaningful than dusting chandeliers or polishing silver. Meanwhile, Daniel quietly observed the bond forming between his daughter and Grace. Unlike Catherine, he felt no jealousy. In fact, he was grateful. He saw how Emily's laughter had returned, how her once lonely eyes now sparkled with life. Though he said nothing, he carried a secret in his heart, a truth about Grace that even Catherine did not know. It was a truth that explained why he had hired her in the first place, and why he trusted her so deeply. But for now, he kept it close, waiting for the right time to reveal it. The mansion, with its glitter and grandeur, was slowly becoming the stage for an invisible battle. A battle between pride and compassion, between appearances and truth. Catherine's suspicion was building, Grace's affection was deepening, Emily's dependence was growing, and Daniel's silence was hiding a truth powerful enough to change everything. And though no one could yet see it, the day was coming when all these tensions would collide in one unforgettable moment. A slap that would shatter illusions, expose hidden truths, and force the household of wealth to face what truly mattered. Grace had now been in the Beaumont household for several months, and her presence had quietly woven itself into the rhythm of daily life. She was everywhere, though never in the way. At dawn, she was the one lighting the lamps and preparing Emily's school uniform. By afternoon, she was arranging flowers in the parlor or folding freshly pressed linens. By evening, she was often in the nursery, humming lullabies Emily had come to adore. Grace moved like a soft shadow, performing her duties with dignity, but also leaving behind something more precious, an air of warmth the mansion had long lacked. Emily, once shy and withdrawn, blossomed under Grace's care. Her laughter rang more often, her questions poured out without fear of being dismissed, and her little feet could always be heard running down the hallways in search of Grace's company. When Catherine called her daughter to sit still during lessons, Emily often sighed and asked, "Can Grace sit with me?" When meals were served in the grand dining hall, Emily sometimes pushed away the fancy dishes, whispering that she preferred the simpler meals Grace prepared in the kitchen. At first, Catherine brushed these things aside. Children were fickle, she told herself. They grew attached to pets, toys, or even servants, and then forgot them the next week. But Emily's attachment was not fading. It was deepening, becoming something Catherine could no longer ignore. The first moment that truly unsettled Catherine came one afternoon when she entered Emily's nursery. She found her daughter seated on the floor, crayons scattered around, her small hands moving furiously over a large sheet of paper. Grace sat beside her, clapping softly each time Emily showed her a new drawing. "Look, Grace, it's you and me in the garden," Emily chirped. The drawing was crude, as children's sketches often are, stick figures with big smiles. But what struck Catherine was that Emily had drawn Grace holding her hand, while she, the mother, was nowhere on the page. Catherine forced a smile, but a coldness settled inside her chest. Later that night, she stood before her gilded mirror, staring at her reflection. She was beautiful, sophisticated, envied by many. Yet, in her own daughter's imagination, she was invisible, replaced. From that day, Catherine's eyes sharpened whenever she looked at Grace. Every small gesture began to feel like a threat. The way Emily clung to Grace's skirt when frightened, the way she giggled freely when Grace lifted her high in the air, the way she whispered secrets into Grace's ear with absolute trust. All these moments seemed to Catherine like daggers chipping away at her rightful place as mother. Her resentment grew silently, but she wasn't the only one who noticed. Servants in grand houses have a way of seeing everything, and soon whispers spread like wind through the staff quarters. "The little miss prefers Grace over her own mother," one maid muttered while polishing the silverware. "Can you blame her?" the cook replied. "Lady Catherine never smiles unless there are guests watching. Grace is the only one who listens to that child. She'd better be careful," the butler added grimly. "Madam won't take kindly to being overshadowed. Pride runs deeper in her than the jewels in her chest." The gossip traveled quickly, though hushed whenever Catherine walked by. Still, she could sense it, the way eyes flickered, the way conversations died abruptly when she entered a room. And though no one dared say it aloud in her presence, Catherine knew the truth they all whispered. Her daughter loved another woman more than her. The sting of it was unbearable. One evening, after a charity gala, Catherine returned home in a stormy mood. She had spent hours listening to society ladies praise her gown and jewelry, yet not a word of it comforted her when she walked past the nursery and heard Emily's giggles. She peeked inside. Grace was sitting on the carpet, hair slightly loose from the day's work, holding Emily in her lap while reading a story aloud. Emily's face glowed with joy, her tiny hands gripping Grace's arm tightly. "Again, Grace. Please, read it again," Emily begged. Grace laughed softly, kissing the child's forehead. "All right, just once more, little one. But then it's bedtime." Catherine's chest tightened. The scene before her looked less like a servant caring for a child, and more like a mother and daughter sharing an intimate bond. Rage and insecurity coiled in her stomach. She slammed the nursery door open, startling both Emily and Grace. "What is going on here?" Catherine snapped. Grace quickly rose to her feet, bowing slightly. "I was just reading to Miss Emily, madam." I didn't ask for your excuses." Catherine cut her off coldly. She turned to Emily, her voice sharp. "You will go to bed now, and from tomorrow you will wait for me to read you stories, not the maid." Emily's lips trembled. "But Mama, Grace tells the stories better. She hugs me when I'm scared." The words were innocent, but they landed like knives. Catherine's cheeks burned with humiliation and fury. She ordered Grace out of the room at once, and though Grace obeyed silently, the look in Emily's tear-filled eyes haunted Catherine for the rest of the night. From then on, Catherine's behavior toward Grace grew colder, more watchful. She scrutinized her every move, waiting for a misstep. Yet Grace gave her none. She remained respectful, never once speaking back, never once showing defiance. Her gentleness was unshakable, and somehow, that only made Catherine's jealousy worse. Daniel, too, began to notice his wife's hostility. He watched as Catherine tightened her jaw whenever Emily clung to Grace, or how her words grew sharper whenever Grace entered the room. Daniel knew Catherine's pride, but he also knew the truth about Grace, a truth he had not yet revealed. He held his silence, hoping his wife would see Grace's worth for herself. But with each passing day, the tension in the house grew heavier, like storm clouds gathering before a downpour. Emily, too young to understand the politics of adults, only sensed the unease. She sometimes asked Grace quietly, "Why is Mama angry with you? Did I do something wrong?" Grace always smiled softly and said, "No, little one, sometimes grown-ups forget how to share love. But it's never your fault." These words comforted Emily, but they did not solve the problem. The bond between Grace and Emily was unshakable, and Catherine's jealousy was boiling dangerously close to the surface. All it would take was one moment, one spark, to ignite the storm that had been building for weeks. That moment was closer than anyone realized. It was a golden afternoon in early spring, the kind of day when sunlight filtered through the trees like ribbons of gold, and the garden seemed alive with color. Emily was playing near the rose bushes, chasing butterflies with a giggle that echoed across the wide lawn. Grace followed a short distance behind, carrying a small basket of freshly laundered linens she had meant to hang in the sun. But when Emily's laughter turned suddenly into a cry, Grace dropped the basket without hesitation. The little girl had tripped on the uneven stone path, her tiny knees scraping against the rough surface. Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she sat on the ground, clutching her bruised knee. "Oh, my sweet girl," Grace murmured, rushing to her side. She knelt down, her skirt gathering dirt, and gently brushed the gravel away from Emily's skin. "It's just a little scratch. Nothing to fear." Emily sniffled, her lips quivering. "It hurts, Grace." "I know, darling, I know," Grace whispered, her voice as soft as a lullaby. She pulled a handkerchief from her apron, wiped the dirt carefully, and then, like her own mother had once done for her, she kissed the small wound to soothe the child's pain. It was a gesture born of instinct, of love unspoken but deeply felt. Emily's sobs slowed. She looked up at Grace with wide, trusting eyes. "You make it better," she whispered, wrapping her little arms around Grace's neck. Grace smiled, holding her close. "That's what family does, little one. We help each other feel better." And it was in that tender moment, with sunlight falling gently across the two of them, that Catherine arrived. She had been returning from an afternoon meeting with her seamstress, her thoughts already swirling with irritation. The dress fittings had taken longer than expected, and she hated being kept waiting by people she considered beneath her. As she entered the garden, the first thing she saw was not her daughter crying, but Grace, kneeling on the ground, cradling Emily as though she were her own child, kissing her gently, whispering comfort. The sight hit Catherine like fire in her veins. Her mind did not register the scraped knees or the tears. It saw only what her jealousy had been whispering for weeks. Grace was overstepping. Grace was trying to replace her. Grace, the maid, had dared to claim a closeness with Emily that belonged only to her, the mother. The basket of linens lay forgotten on the path. The roses swayed softly in the breeze, and Emily clung tightly to Grace's neck. An image that Catherine would later replay in her mind like a haunting picture of betrayal. "How dare she?" Catherine muttered under her breath as her heels struck the stones with sharp, deliberate steps. Grace looked up just in time to see Catherine's figure approaching, her face a mask of rage. She froze, still holding Emily, uncertain of what she had done to provoke such fury. Emily turned too, her small voice breaking the silence. "Mama." But Catherine did not hear the innocence in her daughter's tone. She saw only defiance. "What do you think you are doing?" Catherine's voice was like thunder, rolling through the garden. Grace's lips parted, but words failed her. She gently tried to set Emily back on her feet, but the child clung tighter, frightened by her mother's sudden anger. "Answer me," Catherine demanded, her eyes blazing. "How dare you put your hands on my child? How dare you touch her as if she were your own?" Grace shook her head quickly, her hands trembling. "Madam," she fell. "She was hurt. I was only—" "Lies!" Catherine spat, her fury drowning out reason. Weeks of jealousy, humiliation, and wounded pride spilled over in that single moment. She had tolerated the whispers, the stories, the drawings where Grace replaced her. But to see it with her own eyes, to see her daughter clinging to the maid as though she were mother, was more than her pride could bear. In one swift, uncontrollable motion, Catherine raised her hand and struck Grace across the face. The sound of the slap cracked through the garden like a whip. For a moment, even the birds fell silent. Emily gasped, her eyes wide with horror. "No, Mama! Don't hurt her!" she cried, her tiny arms tightening around Grace's neck. Grace staggered slightly, her cheek stinging red where Catherine's hand had landed. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she did not speak, did not retaliate. She simply lowered her gaze, swallowing the pain with a dignity that seemed to shine even brighter in the face of humiliation. But Emily could not stay silent. Her little voice broke into sobs as she shouted, "Mama, stop! Grace didn't do anything wrong. She was helping me. You're mean." The words struck Catherine harder than she expected. Her own daughter defending the maid against her. For a flicker of a moment, Catherine's fury faltered, but pride quickly hardened her again. "She is not your mother," Catherine snapped, her words directed at both Grace and Emily. "She is a servant. and she will remember her place. Grace gently loosened Emily's grip, her voice calm though her cheek still burned. "It's all right, little one," she whispered. "Don't cry. I'm fine." But Emily's tears only fell faster. She reached for Grace even as Catherine pulled her away. "No, I want Grace. Don't hurt her, Mama. Please." The scene was unbearable. Child sobbing, mother trembling with rage, Maid standing in silent dignity. The mansion staff, who had been tending to chores nearby, gathered quietly at a distance, drawn by the noise. They whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads in pity, others exchanging grim looks. They had long feared something like this would happen. And in that moment, Catherine stood taller, her pride forcing her to maintain her authority before the watching eyes. "This is my house," she declared coldly, "and I will not be disrespected in it. You will remember your place, Grace." Grace bowed her head, her lips pressing together to hold back words she longed to speak. Her heart ached, not for herself, but for Emily, who now clung to her with desperate sobs. Grace wanted to explain, to defend herself, but she knew her voice would only add fuel to Catherine's fire. So she remained silent, her strength showing not in defiance but in restraint. Catherine dragged Emily toward the mansion, ignoring her daughter's cries for Grace. Grace stood rooted to the spot, her hand lightly touching her stinging cheek, her soul heavy with sorrow. She had endured insults before in her life, but never had she felt so humiliated, so wrongly accused, so painfully torn between duty and love. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the garden. The roses swayed in the evening breeze, their beauty a cruel contrast to the ugliness that had unfolded. The air was heavy, charged with the weight of unspoken truths, and though Catherine thought she had reasserted control, she had in fact set into motion the very storm she feared. For this slap, this moment of unchecked pride, would soon unravel the delicate fabric of the household and reveal truths she could never have imagined. The garden, once filled with Emily's laughter, now held only silence, broken by the distant sobs of a child who loved too deeply, a maid who forgave too easily, and a mother who allowed jealousy to blind her to love. The triggering moment had arrived, and nothing in the Beaumont mansion would ever be the same again. The echo of Catherine's hand striking Grace lingered in the air, louder than the rustling leaves, louder even than Emily's wailing. For one breathless moment, the entire world seemed to stop. Grace stood frozen, her cheek flushed red, her eyes wide with shock, and her trembling hands folded against her apron. She did not speak, did not move, did not retaliate. Emily, however, broke the silence. "Mama!" she cried, her tiny fists beating against Catherine's side. "Why did you do that? Why did you hurt Grace?" Tears streamed down her face, her voice trembling with rage and despair far too big for her small body. "Emily, enough!" Catherine snapped, her tone sharper than the crack of the slap itself. "She is a servant. You do not cling to her like that. You are a Beaumont. You must learn your place, and so must she." But Emily was inconsolable. She wrenched free from her mother's grip and ran back to Grace, burying her tear-streaked face into the maid's skirt. "Don't cry, Grace. Don't leave me," she whispered, clutching her like a lifeline. Grace, though stunned, lowered her hand to gently stroke Emily's hair. Her own eyes brimmed with tears, not for herself, but for the child who should never have to witness such cruelty. Her cheek still burned from the strike. Her dignity had been trampled before the household staff. Yet her heart was consumed with only one thought: protecting Emily. "Little one," she murmured softly, bending to Emily's level, "don't cry. I'm all right. I promise you, I'm all right." But her trembling voice betrayed her. The gathered servants shifted uneasily, exchanging looks of discomfort and pity. They had seen Lady Catherine's temper before, but never so publicly, never so cruelly directed at someone so undeserving. The butler stood rigid, jaw tight, as if suppressing the urge to intervene. The cook pressed a hand to her mouth, whispering to a fellow maid, "Poor girl, she didn't deserve this." Catherine, aware of the eyes upon her, straightened her spine. Her pride, wounded by her daughter's defiance and the servant's silent judgment, swelled into cold fury. She refused to be seen as weak, refused to let anyone think she had lost control. "Grace," she said, her voice like ice, "you will remember your position in this house. You are here to serve, not to replace me. You will not touch my child in such a way again. Do you understand?" Grace lifted her gaze slowly, meeting Catherine's eyes with quiet strength. Her lips parted, but for a moment no sound came. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that Emily had fallen, that her kiss on the wound had been nothing but a gesture of comfort. But she knew words would only deepen Catherine's anger, so she swallowed them, bowed her head, and whispered, "Yes, madam." The words were soft, but they carried a dignity that no slap could erase. Emily pulled back in disbelief.
"No."
"Grace didn't do anything wrong. Mama, you're being mean. You don't even love me like she does." The child's outburst was a dagger to Catherine's chest. For a heartbeat, her composure faltered. The words were raw, unfiltered, born from the mouth of innocence, but they struck deeper than any insult an adult could deliver. Catherine's hands trembled slightly, though she quickly clenched them into fists to hide it. "Emily," she said, her voice tight with restraint, "you do not speak to me in that manner." But Emily only sobbed harder, clinging to Grace's arm. "I want her, not you. I want Grace." Gasps rippled through the servants. Even Grace's breath caught in her throat. Never had anyone spoken so plainly in Catherine's presence, much less her own daughter. Catherine's face flushed crimson. Pride and humiliation warred within her. Pride demanding she reassert authority, humiliation whispering that her daughter's love had slipped through her fingers. She turned on her heel, unable to bear the stares of the servants any longer. "Enough of this spectacle," she hissed. "Emily, you will come inside now." But Emily refused to move. She pressed her cheek into Grace's arm, her small voice muffled by sobs.
"No."
"I'm staying with Grace." Catherine's jaw tightened. She reached out to grab her daughter, but Grace stepped back, shielding Emily instinctively. The gesture was not bold, not defiant. It was protective, the reflex of a caregiver shielding a child in distress. Yet to Catherine it felt like a challenge. "You dare," Catherine seethed, her eyes blazing, "to put yourself between me and my own daughter?" Grace shook her head quickly. "No, madam. Please, I only wish to calm her. She is frightened. Let me." "Silence!" Catherine roared, her voice echoing across the garden. Emily flinched at the sound, her sobs turning into hiccuping gasps. Grace held her close, murmuring soothing words, even as her own heart pounded with fear. The staff stood frozen, powerless. They knew better than to interfere, yet every one of them silently condemned the injustice unfolding before their eyes. At last, Grace managed to coax Emily into loosening her grip. She bent low, whispering gently, "It's all right, little one. Go with your mother for now. I'll be here. I'm not leaving you." Emily sniffled, her eyes searching Grace's face for reassurance. Grace gave her a small, brave smile, though her cheek still throbbed from the blow. Slowly, reluctantly, Emily released her hold. Catherine seized her daughter's hand and marched toward the mansion, her posture stiff, her chin raised high. But Emily's cries echoed behind them, filling the garden with heartbreak. "Don't hurt her again, Mama. Please, don't hurt Grace." Grace stood alone, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, the weight of humiliation pressing down on her shoulders. The servants lingered, some stepping forward as if to comfort her, but Grace shook her head faintly. She did not want their pity. She did not want to be the subject of more whispers. Instead, she turned to the roses swaying in the wind, her lips trembling in a silent prayer. She prayed for strength, for Emily's tender heart, for Catherine's blinded soul. She prayed for patience to endure, even when her spirit longed to break. And though her cheek burned and her dignity felt bruised, Grace knew one truth Catherine could not take from her. Love could not be silenced by a slap. Emily's tears, Emily's words, Emily's embrace. They were proof that Grace's care had planted itself deep in the child's heart. No matter how Catherine fought it, that bond was unshakable. But Catherine did not yet understand this. She believed the slap had restored order, that her authority was reestablished, that the matter was settled. What she failed to see was that in striking Grace, she had struck the fragile balance of her household. She had awakened truths that could no longer remain hidden. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the garden, the air seemed heavier, charged with tension. The roses, once witnesses of Emily's laughter, now stood as silent witnesses of a wound that went deeper than skin. A wound of pride, love, and betrayal that would soon unravel into revelation. For though Catherine thought the matter closed, fate had already begun writing the next chapter. And in that chapter, it would not be her pride that triumphed, but the truth her husband carried in silence. Truth that would soon burst forth and change everything. The sun had dipped lower in the sky by the time Daniel Beaumont's car rolled up the long driveway of the estate. The wheels crunched over the gravel path, scattering the last of the sparrows that pecked along the hedges. To anyone watching, it was a routine homecoming. Daniel returning from a long day at the office, his leather briefcase resting in the back seat, his tie loosened against the warmth of the day. But inside the mansion, nothing was routine. As the car door shut and Daniel stepped out, the first thing he noticed was the stillness. Usually, Emily's laughter or the bustle of servants greeted him before he even entered the house. But tonight, the estate felt heavy, almost suffocating, as though the air itself had absorbed the weight of something unsaid. He handed his keys to the waiting chauffeur with a nod and pushed open the ornate double doors. Immediately, his ears caught the faint, muffled sound of crying. It was not the polite whimper of a child refusing supper, nor the short burst of a tantrum. This was deep, hiccuping sobs, the kind that left the chest aching and the eyes swollen. Daniel's heart clenched. Emily. He followed the sound up the marble staircase, his polished shoes echoing against the cold stone. At the top of the stairs, he turned sharply toward the nursery. The door was half open, and from within came the heartbreaking sight of his daughter curled on her bed, her face buried in a pillow. Catherine sat stiffly at the desk nearby, her back to the child, her posture cold, unyielding. "Emily," Daniel said gently, stepping into the room. At the sound of his voice, Emily shot up, her face streaked with tears. "Papa!" she cried, rushing to him. She threw herself into his arms, sobbing into his shirt. Daniel instinctively bent to scoop her up, holding her tight, his protective instincts flooding through him. "What is it, sweetheart? What's wrong?" His eyes darted toward Catherine, suspicion already stirring in his chest. Emily hiccuped between sobs, clutching his collar.
Mama hurt grace."
The words made Daniel freeze. He pulled back slightly to look into his daughter's tear-stained face. "What did you say?" "She hit her," Emily wailed. "Grace was helping me. I fell in the garden, and Mama slapped her." "Papa!" "She slapped her." Daniel's gaze snapped to Catherine, his jaw tightening. "Is this true?" Catherine rose slowly from her chair, her face composed, though her hands fidgeted at her sides. "She was overstepping," she said curtly. "That maid has forgotten her place. I will not have her clinging to our child as if she were the mother. Someone had to remind her." Daniel's eyes darkened, his usual calm demeanor replaced with a sternness that made Catherine shift uncomfortably. "So you struck her? In front of Emily?" "She forced my hand," Catherine retorted, her voice sharp. "You've seen it yourself, Daniel. Emily treats her like family, not a servant. It's improper. It undermines me as her mother." Daniel set Emily gently down on the bed, though her little hands refused to let go. He kissed her forehead softly and murmured, "Stay here, sweetheart." Then he straightened, his full height casting a shadow across the room as he faced his wife. "Where is she now?" he asked coldly. "The maid." Catherine's tone dripped with disdain. "She's no doubt skulking somewhere, playing the victim. That's what women like her do." Daniel's eyes narrowed, And in that moment Catherine realized she had miscalculated. She had expected his support, his agreement that order must be maintained, that pride must be upheld. But instead, she saw fury building in his gaze, not directed at Grace, but at her. Without another word, Daniel turned on his heel and strode out of the nursery. Emily leapt from the bed, running after him. "Papa, don't be angry with Grace, please. She didn't do anything wrong." "I know, little one," Daniel said softly, scooping her up again as he made his way downstairs. His voice was firm, controlled, but inside his heart was pounding. When he reached the garden, he found Grace exactly where he feared she would be. Alone, standing near the roses, her head slightly bowed, her cheek still marked with the faint flush of Catherine's hand. The servants lingered at a distance, whispering quietly, but none dared approach her. "Grace," Daniel called gently. She looked up, her eyes glistening though she quickly wiped them with the edge of her apron. "Sir," she said quietly, bowing her head. Emily wriggled in his arms, reaching toward Grace. "See, Papa? She's hurt. Mama hurt her." Grace shook her head quickly, trying to calm the child. "It's nothing, little one. Just a misunderstanding." But Daniel could see the truth in her trembling hands, in the redness of her cheek, in the quiet way she carried humiliation like a cross upon her shoulders. His fists clenched at his sides. Catherine had followed them down, her heels striking the stone path with sharp defiance. "Daniel, don't let her fool you with her meek act. She's been undermining me for months, worming her way into Emily's heart. I won't have it. I am the mistress of this house, not her." Daniel turned slowly, his eyes locking with hers. "Catherine," he said, his voice low but edged with steel. "You struck an innocent woman who has done nothing but love our daughter when you could not. And worse, you did it before Emily's eyes. Do you have any idea what kind of scar that leaves on a child?" Catherine faltered, her composure slipping. I only did what was necessary. I was protecting my place, protecting your pride." Daniel cut her off. His voice was sharper now, rising with righteous anger. "Not our daughter, not this family. Your pride." The words silenced her, though her lips trembled with the urge to respond. Daniel turned back to Grace, his expression softening. "You did nothing wrong. I know that. And I thank you for caring for Emily when she needed it most." Grace lowered her gaze humbly, though tears finally slipped free. "I only did what any heart would do for a child in pain." Emily squirmed in his arms, reaching again for Grace. Daniel set her down, and she ran straight to the maid, wrapping her arms around her waist. "See, Papa? Grace makes me feel safe." The sight broke Daniel's heart. His little girl, so desperate for warmth, had found it not in her mother, but in the arms of a maid. And the maid, despite humiliation and pain, still gave that love freely. Daniel looked back at Catherine, his voice calm now, but heavy with disappointment. "Do you see, Catherine? Do you see what you've done? You've turned your jealousy into cruelty. You struck the very person who has given our daughter what she's been craving from you all along, love." Catherine's face blanched, her lips parting, but no words came. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her husband's disapproval, and it pierced deeper than any insult. The garden was silent, save for Emily's soft sniffles as Grace stroked her hair. The servants, sensing the gravity of the moment, melted quietly back into the mansion, leaving only the family and the truth hanging between them. Daniel's gaze lingered on his wife, firm and unyielding. "This is not finished," he said. "But know this, Catherine. If you raise your hand again in pride, it will not be Grace who pays the price. It will be you." The warning hung in the air, sharp as the scent of the roses. And in that moment, Catherine realized the ground beneath her pride was beginning to crack. The tension from the garden confrontation followed them back into the mansion like an unwelcome shadow. Daniel's words still hung heavy in the air, leaving Catherine visibly shaken, Emily still clinging to Grace, and the entire household silently aware that something monumental was about to unfold. Daniel led them into the grand drawing room, his stride steady but his jaw tight. He gestured for Grace to sit, though she looked hesitant. Grace had never been offered a chair in that room. Maid stood by the wall, silent and invisible. But now Daniel insisted, and his tone left no room for argument. Catherine remained standing, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, as though shielding herself from an invisible blow. Emily perched on Grace's lap, refusing to leave her side. Daniel remained standing too, but his presence filled the room. Commanding, deliberate, grave. He took a long breath before he began. Catherine, you think Grace is nothing more than a servant, a maid, someone beneath you. But what you don't know, what I never told you, is that she is much more than that. Grace is part of the reason I am the man I am today. And without her, Emily might not even have the father she knows. Catherine frowned, confused but wary. What nonsense are you talking about? She's just a girl from the streets you hired out of pity. Daniel's eyes darkened.
No, Catherine.
Grace is not just a maid. She saved my life. The room stilled. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to hush, as though the very walls leaned in to hear his words. Daniel began to pace slowly, his voice steady, but every sentence carried the weight of memory. Years ago, long before you and I married, I was a different man. Ambitious, yes, but reckless. I wanted to prove myself in business, to expand my father's empire in my own way. I took risks, too many risks, and one night, in a part of the city no respectable man should have been, I was attacked. Catherine's eyes widened slightly. She had never heard this story. I was left bleeding in an alley, Daniel continued, his voice lower now, heavy with recollection. No one came, no one cared. Not the businessmen I had entertained earlier, not the so-called friends who had been drinking with me. They left me for dead. He turned then, his gaze softening as it fell on Grace. But she came. Grace. Grace lowered her eyes, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched Emily closer. She couldn't have been more than 16, Daniel said. She lived on those streets. She had nothing, no food, no roof, no family. And yet, when she found me, broken and barely conscious, she didn't run. She didn't steal the watch from my wrist or the wallet from my pocket, though heaven knows she needed it more than anyone. She stayed. She dragged me, half her size, through filth and mud until she found a place of shelter. She cleaned my wounds with nothing but torn cloth and river water. And she stayed awake the entire night, watching over me, making sure I lived to see the sunrise. Daniel's voice cracked slightly, the memory still raw after all those years. I owe her my life. And when morning came, when I could finally stand again, she disappeared before I could even thank her. It was years before I found her again. Catherine's arms had fallen slowly to her sides, her face pale. She stared at Grace as though seeing her for the first time. Grace finally lifted her eyes, her voice soft but steady. I didn't save him for thanks. I did it because he was a man in need and no one else would. I knew what it was to be unseen, unwanted. I couldn't walk away. Daniel nodded, his eyes shining with quiet gratitude. When I later saw her on the streets again, still struggling, still carrying the burden of survival, I knew I couldn't turn away. I brought her here, gave her work, not out of pity but out of debt, a debt of honor. And over the years, Grace has never once failed this family. She has been loyal, humble, and above all, she has given Emily the warmth that even I could not always provide. The silence that followed was suffocating. Catherine's lips parted, but no words came. She looked from Daniel to Grace, her mind reeling, pride warring with the dawning truth. Emily, innocent in her understanding, broke the silence first. So Grace is like our guardian angel, Papa? Daniel smiled faintly, placing a hand on his daughter's head. Yes, Emily. In a way, she is. Catherine finally found her voice, though it trembled. You never told me this. You never told me she was. Because it wasn't about me, Daniel interrupted firmly. It was about her. She never asked for recognition, never sought praise. She chose silence, humility, and I respected that. But today you crossed a line, Catherine. You struck her as though she were less than human, as though she didn't matter, and I could no longer stay silent. Grace shifted uncomfortably, her instinct to shrink back into invisibility tugging at her, but Emily clung tighter, as if to shield her from any further harm. Catherine's throat worked as she tried to speak. Her voice, usually sharp and commanding, came out strained. I didn't know. Daniel's gaze hardened. But you assumed. You assumed because of her skin, because of her station, because of your pride, that she was beneath you. And that is something I cannot accept in the woman who stands beside me as my wife. The words cut deeper than any slap could. Catherine's chest tightened, and for the first time, she felt truly cornered. Not by circumstance, but by her own reflection staring back at her through her husband's eyes. She looked again at Grace. This young woman she had dismissed, belittled, struck. Grace's cheek still bore the faint red mark of her hand, and for the first time, Catherine saw it not as an act of authority, but as evidence of cruelty. Emily reached up, touching her mother's hand softly. Mama, Grace loves me. She makes me feel safe. Why can't you see that? Catherine's eyes brimmed with tears she hadn't realized were gathering. For once, her daughter's words pierced the wall of pride she had so carefully built around her heart. Daniel stepped closer, his tone softer now but resolute. Catherine, this house is not built on titles or appearances. It is built on love, on loyalty, on the choices we make to lift others up instead of pushing them down. Grace has given us that gift freely. The question is, will you? The weight of his words hung heavy, demanding an answer Catherine wasn't yet sure she could give. For the first time, her certainty wavered, her pride crumbling under the undeniable truth. The woman she had despised was the very one who had saved the man she loved, and who had given her child the affection she herself struggled to provide. And in that moment, Catherine realized if she did not change, she would lose everything. Catherine sat in the ornate drawing room long after Daniel's words had fallen silent. The heavy velvet curtains muffled the late afternoon sun, casting the space in a somber glow. The house was quiet, but inside her mind, a storm raged louder than ever. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed them together on her lap. Pride had always been her shield, the mask she wore to move with authority, to demand respect, to ensure she was never underestimated as a woman of status. But now that same pride felt like a prison, keeping her locked away from the truth she could no longer deny. She looked at Grace, sitting quietly with Emily nestled against her. The sight stirred something unfamiliar in Catherine's chest. Envy? Yes, but also shame. Emily's little arms wrapped securely around Grace's neck, her eyes shining with pure trust and affection. That look had once been hers, Catherine realized. Once, when Emily was younger, her daughter's eyes had lit up at her presence. But somewhere along the way, in her endless pursuit of appearances and control, Catherine had lost that bond. And Grace, the very woman she had struck without hesitation, had somehow nurtured it. Her throat tightened, the echo of the slap replayed in her memory, louder now than it had been in the garden. She remembered the sting in her palm, the rush of righteous anger she had felt in the moment. But now all she felt was disgust. Disgust at herself. Why? Catherine whispered under her breath, so softly that no one else could hear. Why did I do that? Daniel's words came back to her. You struck her as though she were less than human, as though she didn't matter. The truth hurt because it was real. She had seen Grace not as a person, but as a shadow in her house. A servant, an inconvenience, a reminder of a world beneath her. It hadn't mattered to her then if Grace's hands were kind, if her heart was good. All Catherine had seen was difference. And in her blindness, she had raised her hand in cruelty. Her pride tried to intervene, whispering excuses. She touched Emily without asking. She overstepped her place. Any mother would have reacted. But another voice, softer yet stronger, answered back. No, you didn't protect Emily. You punished Grace. And your daughter has chosen her arms over yours. What does that say? Catherine pressed a hand to her forehead, her eyes closing against the weight of it all. She thought of Daniel's story. Grace dragging him through the streets, tending wounds with nothing but scraps, watching over him through the night. Catherine tried to picture herself in Grace's place. Would she, raised in comfort and privilege, have done the same for a stranger bleeding in the dark? She couldn't say with certainty that she would have. A lump formed in her throat. Her gaze shifted again to Grace, and this time, she saw not a maid, not an intruder in her home, but a young woman marked by hardship, carrying quiet strength. Grace's skin bore scars Catherine couldn't see, scars of hunger, of loneliness, of being unwanted. And yet, in spite of all that, she had chosen compassion over bitterness. Catherine's cheeks burned with humiliation. For years, she had looked down on Grace, believing herself superior. But in truth, Grace's heart was far richer than hers. She thought of Emily again. Her daughter's smile had been rare lately, but in Grace's presence, it bloomed effortlessly. Catherine remembered the bedtime stories she had dismissed as nonsense, the songs she had once sung but no longer had time for. She realized now that while she had been chasing society's approval, Emily had been finding comfort elsewhere, in Grace, in the warmth Catherine had withheld. The thought pierced her like a knife. What kind of mother lets another woman replace her in her child's heart? Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back, ashamed even of her vulnerability. She had built her life on the belief that showing weakness was dangerous, that tears were weapons for the powerless. But here, now, weakness was not an option. It was the truth, and it demanded to be faced. Her pride pushed once more. You are the wife. You are the mistress of this home. Why should you lower yourself? But Daniel's voice cut through the noise, clear and unwavering in her memory. This house is not built on titles or appearances. It is built on love, on loyalty, on the choices we make to lift others up instead of pushing them down. Her pride faltered. Catherine rose from her seat, her legs unsteady as though the ground beneath her had shifted. Grace looked up instantly, startled, protective. Emily stirred, sensing movement, but clung tighter to Grace's neck. That small gesture, her daughter's preference, hurt more than any words could. Catherine's lips parted, but the words caught in her throat. Apologies had never come easily to her. To apologize meant admitting she had been wrong, and Catherine had lived too long convincing herself she was always right. But as she stood there, face to face with the woman she had demeaned, she knew that nothing less would suffice. Her eyes flicked to Daniel, who stood silently, watching her with a gaze both firm and expectant. He would not force her. This was her choice to make. She turned back to Grace. Her chest rose and fell as she wrestled with the words, her voice breaking when she finally spoke. She swallowed hard. I was wrong. The room seemed to still. Grace blinked in surprise, her expression unreadable. Catherine forced herself to continue. I judged you. I looked at you and saw nothing but what I wanted to see, your position, your differences. I let my pride blind me, and in that blindness, I hurt you. Worse, I showed my daughter cruelty when she should have seen compassion. For that, I am sorry. The admission felt like ripping open her chest, exposing a part of herself she had long kept buried. But strangely, in that vulnerability, there was relief. Emily lifted her head, her wide eyes darting between her mother and Grace. Mama, she whispered. Catherine knelt slowly, bringing herself level with her daughter. For the first time in a long while, her eyes softened. Mama was wrong, Emily. Grace is not our servant. She is our friend. She is someone who deserves respect, just like anyone else. Do you understand? Emily nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. She turned and hugged Grace tighter, as if confirming her mother's words. Grace, however, remained quiet. Catherine saw hesitation in her eyes, the guardedness of someone who had been hurt too many times to trust easily. And Catherine knew it would take more than words to heal the wound she had caused. But for the first time, she was willing to try. She straightened, looking directly at Grace. If you can find it in your heart to forgive me, I will spend the rest of my days proving I am worthy of it. Not as your mistress, but as a woman humbled by your strength." Grace's lips parted slightly, but no words came. Her eyes glistened with emotion she tried to hide. Daniel stepped forward then, placing a hand on his wife's shoulder. "This is the beginning, Catherine, not the end. The choice you make now will define the woman our daughter remembers you to be." Catherine closed her eyes, a tear finally escaping down her cheek. She nodded. For the first time in years, Catherine felt the weight of her pride lifting. It would not be easy to rebuild what she had broken. Not with Grace, not with Daniel, not even with Emily. But the first step had been taken. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was enough. The morning after Catherine's apology dawned with a softness the household hadn't felt in a long while. Sunlight poured gently through the tall windows, brushing the marble floors in golden light. Birds sang outside in the manicured gardens, and for once, the air in the house carried not tension but the faintest whisper of hope. Catherine stood at the threshold of Emily's room, watching silently as Grace helped the little girl get dressed. Emily giggled at some silly story Grace was telling, her laughter ringing like music through the halls. Catherine's lips curved into a small, wistful smile, an expression rare on her face. For years, she had been too consumed with controlling her home, presenting perfection to the outside world, and proving herself to society. But here, in this simple exchange of joy, she saw what truly mattered. Her daughter's happiness. It was not wealth that secured it, not social standing, not appearances, it was love. And Grace, the very woman Catherine had once seen as nothing more than a servant, had given Emily that love freely. "Grace!" Catherine called softly. Both Grace and Emily turned. For a moment, the younger woman seemed hesitant, uncertain if the words that would follow might sting again. Catherine felt the weight of that hesitation like a blade. She had caused it, but she would heal it. "Would you allow me?" Catherine asked, stepping into the room. Her voice was gentler than Grace had ever heard it, her expression stripped of its usual coldness. Grace blinked, then nodded slowly. She stepped back, letting Catherine take her place beside Emily. The little girl's eyes lit up. "Mama, will you help me with my shoes?" Catherine's heart swelled at the request. Kneeling down, she carefully fastened the tiny buckles on Emily's shoes. Her fingers trembled, not from the task, but from the realization that she was being given another chance. Emily still wanted her. The bond wasn't lost. It had only been waiting for her to remember it. When Catherine looked up, Emily threw her arms around her neck. "I love you, Mama." Tears blurred Catherine's vision, but she held her daughter tightly. "I love you too, my precious girl. More than anything." Grace watched quietly, her face softening. For the first time, she saw Catherine not as a proud mistress, but as a mother, flawed, broken, but trying. And in that moment, she understood Daniel's faith in his wife. There was more to Catherine than her pride. Beneath it lay a woman capable of love and change. Later that day, Daniel gathered everyone in the drawing room. His tone was firm but filled with warmth. "This home has stood for generations, but what makes it strong is not the stone or the wealth. It's the people within it. Yesterday we faced a fracture. Today we begin to mend it." He turned to Catherine, his gaze steady. "You've taken the first step, but healing is not a single act. It's a journey." Catherine nodded. "I know, and I am ready to walk it." Her eyes shifted to Grace. "If you will allow me." Grace hesitated, her emotions conflicted. Forgiveness was not easy. Wounds did not close overnight. But she thought of Emily, of the bond they shared, and of the look on Catherine's face as she knelt to apologize. Perhaps this was not about erasing the past but building a different future. "I will try," Grace said quietly. Relief washed over Catherine. She gave a small bow of her head, not the gesture of a mistress to a servant, but of one woman humbling herself before another. Days turned into weeks, and slowly change took root in the household. Catherine no longer barked orders at Grace, but instead asked. She no longer dismissed her presence but engaged her in conversation. At first, the exchanges were brief, tentative. But with time, they grew warmer, layered with genuine curiosity and respect. Grace, though cautious, began to lower her guard. She saw consistency in Catherine's efforts, not just empty words. The walls of mistrust between them, once impenetrable, began to show cracks. Emily thrived in the new atmosphere. She delighted in spending time with both Grace and her mother, no longer torn between them. In fact, she often became the bridge, pulling them together for games, meals, or walks in the garden. Her innocence softened what pride and pain might have kept apart. One afternoon, Catherine joined Grace in the kitchen. The smell of warm bread filled the air as Grace worked, her hands moving with practiced ease. Catherine lingered at the doorway for a moment, then stepped inside. "May I help?" she asked. Grace looked up, startled. "Help? Yes," Catherine replied with a small, sheepish smile. "I never learned to bake properly, but Emily adores your bread. I'd like to learn for her." Grace hesitated, then handed Catherine a bowl of flour. "Very well, but don't say I didn't warn you. Baking isn't forgiving." Catherine laughed lightly, the sound surprising even herself. "Neither am I. Perhaps it's time I learned." They worked side by side, awkward at first, but gradually more comfortable. For Catherine, it was a humbling experience. Her hands covered in flour, her apron stained. Yet she found joy in the imperfection, in the shared laughter when her dough collapsed into a shapeless mess. Grace's quiet chuckle, once rare in Catherine's presence, felt like music. It was not just bread being made that day, it was trust. As the months passed, the transformation in the household became undeniable. Catherine had softened, but not in weakness, in strength. She was still proud, still strong, but her pride was no longer a weapon. It was tempered with humility, sharpened by compassion. Daniel watched with pride as his wife grew into the woman he always believed she could be. He saw the bond between Catherine and Grace evolve from hostility to cautious respect, and finally, to something resembling friendship. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Emily chattered happily about her day. Catherine listened intently, her hand occasionally brushing Grace's in small, unspoken acknowledgments of gratitude. For once, the table was not divided by rank or resentment, but united in warmth. Daniel raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said. Catherine met Grace's gaze, and this time, there was no tension, only understanding. "To new beginnings," she echoed. Grace smiled faintly. "And to second chances." That night, as Catherine tucked Emily into bed, the little girl whispered sleepily, "Mama, I'm glad Grace is here. She makes us better." Catherine's throat tightened. She kissed Emily's forehead, her heart swelling with gratitude, not just for her daughter, but for the woman who had come into their lives as a maid and stayed as something far more precious. When she left the room, she paused at the doorway, looking back at Emily nestled peacefully beneath her blankets. A sense of peace washed over her. She had been wrong, she had fallen, but she had risen again. Not by clinging to her pride, but by letting it go. And in doing so, she had found something greater. Love, humility, and the chance to be not just a better mistress of her home, but a better wife, a better mother, and a better woman. For Catherine, Grace, Daniel, and Emily, it was indeed a new beginning. One built not on power, but on respect, forgiveness, and the unshakable bond of family.